I think a lot of businesses in the outdoors succeed because there's people at the top that care more about the product than anything. It's not to say there aren't outdoor companies that have done well just because there's been MBAs at the top and figured out how to make money by making catchy things. There are those businesses, but more of them fail than the businesses that are run by sort of the passion people at the top. So I think that's a critical element. It's kind of a core business philosophy that I have, that you've got to kind of stay part of the business in order to keep it going, especially for small to medium sized business. So I'm reluctant to just pursue growth for growth's sake there.
My conversation today is with Thor Tingey. Thor is the CEO of Alpacka Packrafts. Alpacka is leading brand in the growing sport of packrafting. Thor leads a team of more than 40 employees in Southwest Colorado, where they build every boat in-house. When I schemed up the idea for the Core Outdoors podcast 2 years ago, I made a list of CEOs and founders I wanted to talk to, and Thor was at the top of that list. I wanted to have this conversation for a few reasons. The first is that a few of the best trips I've ever had involved Alpacka Packrafts, and my list of future trips that I want to go on involve packrafts too. Needless to say, I'm a fanboy. But more importantly, the mission of the Core Outdoors podcast is to hear the stories and business philosophies from founders and leaders in the outdoor industry. Thor is an incredibly thoughtful leader who's willing to speak his mind and also admit when he has changed his mind. He's building a company on a strong foundation of values and a long-term vision that puts his customers and his employees first. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Thor Tingey. I'm curious what river trips look like for you now.
What do they look like for me now?
Yeah. Because I've listened to a lot of podcasts with you.
Yeah.
And like in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
You went on some pretty gnarly trips. And I'm just curious what, you've got one kid now. You have a son.
I have one child. He's pretty profoundly disabled. He has level 2 autism. So that is that's an experience. Like being a parent is not what it's like for everyone else in the world.
Yeah.
And it's hard to raise one of those. I can't. There are families that have multiples, and I'm just like, I don't know how they do it. So that's changed a lot of actually how how much time I have. The biggest impact of that is sort of that there's less of a family unit now because he takes a lot of energy. He does. One of the cool things is he does well in the outdoors, which is good for our family, but he struggles in obviously, common in social situations, but any kind of crowd, like the Denver airport is a horrible place to be as a family. And he, when we fly places with him, it's always a little bit touch and go. So we try to do overnight flights because we can give him melatonin and he gets some good sleep, and that works out better for us. But once we're in the backcountry, he's great. So when we do trips, it's great. We can do river trips. We've done several with him, which is really fun. So we do some family river trips, and then my wife and I end up having to do more of like individual trips where I go on a trip or she goes on a trip rather than us going on a trip, just because one of us kind of has to be with him most of the time. We managed to get away twice in the 5 years that he's been alive. Our grandparents have watched him for a week, and that's been pretty cool. So I don't do as many sort of, I'm just going to go meet friends for the weekend to go paddle class 4 or 5 anymore. I might get that once every 18 months. But I still usually get at least one big packraft fishing trip a year, and hopefully a family trip a year.
And what role does that time in the wilderness play for you? As a founder, as a human, as a dad?
It resets things. I'll be the first to admit that I have struggled with screen time addiction. I don't think I'm as bad as some people, but it's bad enough. And so getting just to get out in the wilderness and get away from it all and relax and, live. For me, it's a lot about living in, it's going to sound corny. It's almost like living in more in tune with yourself and nature. So, you sleep till you wake up, and then you spend your day getting on stuff and spend the day in the outdoors. And if that day starts at 10 and in Alaska, really, if the day starts at 10 and ends at 10, that's what the day was. And if the day started at 7 and then ended at 3, then that's what the day was. And I really enjoy that. Just kind of like playing the day how it goes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's what the wilderness has played in my life too. Like we were just on a trip in August as a family and on the Heart River in the Yukon,
Yep.
and that it's like that river time. And I've read that it takes 3 days in the wilderness for you to start to reset, and then it takes like 10 days for you actually to sink into it. And
You
it's just amazing what happens.
that's I think that's pretty accurate because so before we came back to Alpaca, and, we were living in Portland, and we did, I don't think I had taken a vacation longer than a week or 10 days from 2004 to 2015, and then we took a year sabbatical. And it was 3 full weeks before we dropped, settled back out uh, of what I would feel like the daily grind was, where we kind of like our bodies fully adjusted to not really having a schedule on any given day. I think you adjust faster on backcountry trips, especially when you've done them before. You're like, okay, this is how it's going. But I think on vacation, especially when there's air travel on either end, it if you go on a week long vacation, don't get me wrong, they're wonderful, but only a little snippet of that time is really like where the blood pressure and stress hormones have dropped off and you're sort of relaxed.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, it's interesting because you're running a company that essentially provides those experiences to people,
Mm-hmm.
like on the regular. That's when I think about pack rafting, I think about wilderness, I think about backcountry. I mean, there's other applications that are more urban and rural, which are advantages to the pack raft. But really, I mean, that's the heart and soul. The solution that you came about with 25 years ago is to get people in the wilderness.
Yeah, that's the core purpose. And even I've admittedly struggled with whether what we're doing is a good thing.
How
I don't
so?
have I don't have a clean it. Well, when I walked across the Brook Range in 2000 with 4 friends, we saw two, no, we saw one person, one single human
How many
in
days?
700 miles, 39 days, 700 miles. We saw one single person who was not in a town or at a cabin. We ran into a cool group of people that had a cabin out on a lake, and they were there for the summer. And then when we kind of walked through the villages, we ran into people there. But in terms of the wilderness travel, we ran into one person, and that's physically impossible now. You cannot go to the Brooks Range and walk across it and not run into people.
Okay.
And 80, 90% of them are going to be in pack rafts. And in some ways, I think that's great. It's great to see people out there enjoying the resource and all that other stuff. But, you know, it definitely, there's real impacts to that. And, you know, it's, it's just an ethical quandary you have to deal with. There, you create this product, this great idea for all your stuff, and then, people end up, you know, I wouldn't say it's crowded still, so it's
Sure.
still you still get that experience, but it's not the same as it was. And that's in some ways that's just life, but something that I'm kind of cognizant of. And we've been careful not to we try not to publish where a lot of photos like in our social media are just for that purpose. Like
Yeah.
go find out your own stuff. And the reality is you don't have to find like the most secluded, amazing place. Like, I've had amazing experiences my first time in a place where that's relatively popular.
Yeah. There's always unintended consequences of the
Yep.
products and the services we produce, right? That's just, like clothing, gear, everything has unintended consequence, whether it's environmental or social,
Yep.
we can't control all those factors for sure. I think
100%.
that I would as a user, I would or sorry, as a user of the backcountry and the wilderness, I would say the upsides beat the potential downsides.
I agree, and that's what so it's not it doesn't keep me up at night, but I've noticed it,
Yeah.
and so I've even noticed it myself that I've started to pursue sort of the lesser known areas, which I'm not even going to go into detail on, but the Brooks Range is still amazing. But most of the time when I go there, I do run into people. What's funny is some of the more famous traditional routes in the Brooks Range are now less crowded. So, yeah, just for example, like the Marsh Fork of the Canning was not a super popular river uh, before pack rafting started. The flows are a little bit too variable and things like that. Well, now the Marsh Fork's relatively popular because pack rafting makes that a really, really cool trip. It's a spectacular, beautiful place. But there are some tributaries like of the Noatak that were well documented, and people have been running those rivers since the 60s or earlier, 60s, 70s. And, you go there today, and because they're more of a traditional raft route, you don't see that many people on them. And they're kind of off pack rafters' radar. And as pack rafts has kind of taken over more of what happens up there, some of the more traditional routes, I think, are still pretty um, quiet. I don't like, for example, I don't know. I have not been on the Colville River. It's kind of on the list. It's slow and very windy, but has spectacular wildlife and prehistoric resources on it. But I don't think the Colville is that busy because I don't think there's that many pack rafters on it.
Hmm.
So
It's interesting. I should back up and say the there's a ton of history that people can find. The people listening to this can find out a ton of history on alpaca. There's
yeah,
other podcast. There's other podcasts where you've talked about
yeah,
the formation story, which is amazing. The role that your mom Sherry has played in it. You have a
yep,
wonderful video on your website that. So I would encourage, and I will link to it in the show notes. I don't want to like jump right back into that because you've
yep,
talked about that other places. But I am curious. You mentioned a second ago that you took a sabbatical. You were in Portland, took a sabbatical, and then you came to the business. So like you weren't a part of Alpacka in the early days, in the sense that you weren't like in the office. You weren't part of the business, though you were still connected to it, obviously, because it was a family business in that sense. So where did you go, and then why did you come back?
yeah. That's a good question because I in that part of the story I haven't talked about a lot. So when we founded Alpacka, it was my mom, late 50s, early 60s, me, 22 years old, and fresh out of college. And for me, it was all about the product. Could we create a product that allowed me to do these, this new sport and trips that I'd stumbled on? For my mom, having a background in actually being in the outdoor industry, it was way more about this is a business. This is something I can do. I'm an empty nester now. This is something I can pour my energy into, and as a new career. But I would say at that point in life, it's not that we didn't get along, but I think we both knew that we didn't work well together. We needed, we need, I needed to pursue different things in life. And what's funny about that is I grew up in a total outdoor household. Mom had these clothing businesses and we did dog meshing and all of these outdoor sports. I had no idea that you could make money in the outdoors. My sole sort of tie to that as I ended up working at Alaska Mountaineering and Hiking in Anchorage, which is just a classic climbing, skiing, now pack rafting shop. I didn't know that you could get an engineering degree and go design clothing for Patagonia or North Face or Mountain Harbor or whatever it was, or get a business degree. So I had a biology degree, and so I spent a few years pursuing fisheries biology for the federal government. I worked down in Southwest Alaska and then out of the Anchorage area. And I decided I didn't want to do sort of, you know, that long term. I didn't want to go get a PhD. So I went to law school thinking I was going to do fisheries policy. That's what I was interested in. And then I did really well in law school at Lewis and Clark in Portland and got offered a classic large firm job in Portland, where I started actually in land use during the recession. So that quickly changed, and I ended up in bankruptcy practice, which is a very odd place for me to end up. I worked with absolutely incredible guys and women attorneys there who taught me a lot, and I learned a lot, and I loved the work, even though being a corporate lawyer is hard. But I think it helped me for Alpacka because I saw a lot of businesses fail.
Hmm.
That was kind of my job was to deal with, the fallout of a failing business. So I'm a fairly conservative business person because I spent so much time in corporate bankruptcy. And then in 2013, I got a pretty significant head injury working in my garage on a bike. I slipped with a wrench, took handlebars to the bridge of my nose at baseball bat speed, spent a year with a pretty substantial side effects from that, trouble sleep, just all the concussion stuff. And slowly have climbed my way back. I've never fully recovered, but that made it hard to practice law. And at the same point, my wife, who was working for Nike, she wanted out of Portland, too busy, commute was long, all the things. And meanwhile, over this 15-year period, my mom had really grown the business from something that didn't pay bills to something that barely paid bills to something that had employees to something that was like, you know, getting more and more well known. And my mom is a designer at heart, and she's good at business because she's passionate about the product and design. That's what she lives for. But running the day-to-day ins and outs of the business, not her thing. And so my wife and I came back to the business to sort of help it through those next steps. So even though I'm a product-centric person, I'm more interested in how to, I love manufacturing. So I love designing the manufacturing systems, and I love coming up with the ideas for the products, but I don't design the products themselves. That's mom still. And then we have a in-house designer that does a lot of our work. So that's really kind of how that story went.
Yeah, maybe this is a good place to say after watching the film Sherry about your mom, I immediately texted to my wife and was like, "You have to watch this. This is an amazing woman that very much reminds me of my wife. I ran my business previously with my wife, and she's a force. Like Sherry is a force, and it's pretty incredible. So I'm just putting it out there because I feel like it's worth saying.
I've had, you're not the first person that said that. I've had several people that have responded with similar things. In fact, one of the main product guys at Kuyu, who's a friend of mine, said he grew up in a very similar thing, and it was his mom that got him into product and product design. So
she has a very cool story. So I'll link to it, that the film, and it's highly worth checking out. I'm curious, in your corporate legal days, were you still in a pack raft? Were you finding time to get out there on the rivers and do those things?
A little bit. The mountain biking in Northwest is absolutely fantastic.
Sure.
And so my wife and I started really picking that up. I've done a lot of different sports over my life, and I kind of like focused on one for a few years. So during those years, I wasn't focused on pack rafting as much. It wasn't like we went paddling every week, which is funny because the paddling in the Northwest is fantastic as well. Most weekends we went mountain biking, but a few times a year we'd get out in the pack rafts and go play around on, the local whitewater runs, the class threes in the Portland area, which is funny because at that time, there was a lot of derision. You run into kayakers and they're like, "What are you doing here? That is not a safe craft to be on this water." And that's changed over the last 20 years for sure. And then we kind of about every 2 to 3 years, we would do a pack rafting trip in either Alaska or the Northwest, where we'd actually do a real pack rafting trip where we'd put it in a backpack, hike in, float out kind of thing.
Okay, so I'm going to jump a little bit in time. So you come back in 2016, you joined the company in 2016.
Yeah, so I left law practice in May of 2015, a year sabbatical. So I was on the ground in Mancos full time in spring of 2016. But we spent a lot of that sabbatical actually pack rafting, meeting people, and connecting back with the company. So
knowing that's where you're headed.
Yes. So even though I wasn't on the ground like running the manufacturing, I was on the ground talking to customers and seeing what people were doing with them. Because for me, it was like this new exposure to this whole world that mom had grown the company into, and the rest of the world had grown the sport into, that I needed to get comfortable with. So we spent time in Alaska with old friends. We ran the Selway. We went out to the McCarthy Whitewater Festival where we got to kind of see what Core Alaska was doing. We did two different trips in the Brooks Range, and then we went to New Zealand for 3 months and went to the Roundup in New Zealand and got to see how people were using them down in New Zealand and Australia. So I think it was a good learning and growth experience for me.
That sounds like a really good sabbatical.
It was pretty nice. I miss it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds yeah. How can we do
Where
that again?
Yeah, we were lucky that New Zealand doesn't just let random Americans move there permanently that easily because it would have been hard to leave.
Yeah, they would have had to shake you off somehow.
Yeah.
So in a previous conversation, you mentioned to me that you'd rather sell 500 boats to the right people as opposed to 1,000 boats to the wrong people. So I'm curious what the right customer for Alpacka looks like.
It's not a specific person. I just want people to enjoy the product, So it's whatever. I just don't want the product to sit in a closet because they bought it at a good deal and it wasn't what they really needed and they didn't ever end up using it. I don't think you might make more money in 1 year because you aggressively marketed and sold and stuff like that. But I think for a sustainability perspective, when you're selling to the right people, the people that do want to use the product, regardless of how they use it, they don't have to be hardcore whitewater, hardcore backcountry users. We have amazing, wonderful customers who literally they're not athletic. They just get out every weekend or a weekend a month and do a super fun paddling thing. Those are great customers. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. So the key is that the people enjoy the product, and then when they enjoy the product, they will speak highly of it, and then the word of mouth travels, and I think that's a sustainable long-term business model as opposed to we don't pursue growth for growth's sake.
Yeah. In some ways, it feels like maybe this isn't 100% accurate, but it kind of feels like maybe in the last let's say the last 5 years, it feels like a 25-year overnight success story,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's like
Yeah.
we've been watching. If you're into river sports, you've been watching Alpacka, the rise of pack rafts in general, and Alpacka leading the charge and all those things. And then it kind of feels like, oh, wow, it feels like everywhere, and that comes. You have competitors now who are chasing you and all those things. What have been the advantages of that slow growth for Alpacka?
There's several. One is I think you kind of get that core customer base that really cares about the company and cares about the product. So you don't have as many people out there saying, it wasn't for me or I didn't like it, because most of the people that buy the boats really enjoy them and they work out for them, and then they speak highly of the company and the product. So you get that. The second is this also goes into our manufacturing philosophy where we build to order more than we build to stock. So if there's a problem, we can fix it pretty fast. So, and that does happen. We'll get through and say, yeah, this isn't quite right. And we'll make an adjustment in line. And generally, we don't have that many boats out the door that were impacted by that. So that saves money because it's not like you had 100 or 300, 500 or 1,000 boats that you just ordered from your factory that we got the design engineering wrong. And when you work with a factory that you don't own, where you were buying in bulk, there's a lot more R&D on the front end because if you got to get it right. Because if it's not right, and then you suddenly have 1,000 units on the shelf that aren't ideal, then that'll cost you money in the long term. Whereas we can fine tune as we go and work out kinks. And that's not to say if you're like an early adopter that you're getting a bad product. We do try to make them perfect, but you can make those little tweaks, and when occasionally there's a problem, we help out the customers that kind of have that. So I think that's been a really nice feature of that slow growth.
Yeah, so you manufacture everything in-house in Southwest Colorado. You've got a
Yep.
staff of over 40 people,
Yep.
operating there. You can essentially come up with a design, concept it and build it that day, and theoretically get it on the water and try it out.
Yeah, yeah. The design team can come up with a new idea and on a Monday and have it in the water Tuesday afternoon.
It's amazing. Yeah, you don't get that. You don't get that when you contract manufacture. And
No, no, it's funny. We have a spray skirt that we did with immersion research, and it's really cool. But that was kind of our first experience, really kind of having to work with a contract manufacturer. So we're not only working, we're working with immersion research, which is a separate brand, but then they have their own factory in Taiwan, and so like the product development phase is really interesting. Now, don't get me wrong, immersion research has full R&D facility here, so they can build prototypes pretty fast. But then once those prototypes are made, then they have to go to the factory and you have to go through a whole costing, bill of materials. You get a counter sample back from the factory, and you go back and forth until everything's dialed. And then you say, okay, go. You place your order. We're ordering, 500 or 1,000 spray skirts. And then we're going to wait months and months and months and months and months. And then the factory finishes the order, and then it's on a ship, and then it comes over. And then finally we have them in house. And at that point, it's like, well, they better be right.
yeah, yeah. And who knows what the duty will be that day.
Yeah.
So this at once manufacturing,
Yep.
that's relatively unique
Very unique.
In the outdoor world. I definitely see some advantages from a cost of goods and inventory, like you
Yep.
mentioned. Like you don't have to sit on a bunch of different boats that may or may not sell or have a problem. But so there's some clear upsides. I see those.
Yep.
What are the potential downsides that you have to mitigate, and what are the things that you consider as you go through this process?
Time. A second upside is that we can offer a much broader range of product. So when you look around at most of our competitors, they offer a much smaller product range.
Okay.
And that's because they have to carry things to stock. So you can't offer 4 colors and 3 sizes and 3 builds of every model. I think we have 135 or 40 SKUs, which is actually smaller than 10 years ago. We probably had 600 SKUs, and we kind of compacted that back down. Just because we offered a lot of stuff. And then we have thousands of different options in our custom lab for people that want more than what we just offer like that. So the downsides, one is time, just the restaurant analogy is the best. We're more like a sit down restaurant than a grab and go restaurant. But the problem is the sit down is 4 weeks. So you place an order today, you get a boat in 4 weeks. When it's May, and a lot of people are late deciders, including me, you're sitting there going, I have a trip coming up, but I haven't ordered a boat yet, and I'm not going to get it in time. So we've mitigated that through dealers. So dealers will have stock on hand, and then we do have ready to ship boats over the last couple of years. We'll take some of our most popular models, and we'll try to keep some stock of those. Charge a little bit more for them, but it's you'll get it in 3 days rather than in 4 weeks. So we've tried to mitigate that, but I know that we definitely lose some sales in the busiest season, sometimes to our customers, and sometimes people are just like, oh, I'm not going to buy anything. I'll wait till next year to buy one.
Okay.
And I've done that myself. So in light equipment, sleeping bags, they have plenty of stock, but they do make, I prefer the extra long, extra wide, which they don't make any stock of. And so this year I was like, oh man, I have a 20-degree one. I really wanted a 0 or a 10. And I sat and I sat and I sat. And then finally I was like, oh, well, it's too late. It's an 8-week lead time and my trip is in 3 weeks. So I still haven't bought one. I didn't go buy some competitors. I just took my 20-degree bag with some extra stuff, but that stuff does happen.
Yeah. And so for those busy spring production weeks, or months, I should say, other than holding some inventory, like what changes from a production? Do you have to make big changes from the production side? Do you scale up numbers? Do you scale up staff?
No, that's actually one of the biggest challenges. One of the things that's super interesting is like, how do we keep production level year round with this kind of a system? And we've worked really hard on that. it's never going to be completely level. And, employees also need a break too. But
Sure.
from about 1st of March to 1st of August, it's go time. We are full busy every week with direct to consumer straight off the website sales. So that's when we're just, everybody's kind of busiest. And so we're most restrictive with time off for employees, even though we try to accommodate that and that kind of thing. And then the other 6 months of the year, we have a lot more flexibility. So we fill that time with three things. One is our dealers, they have pre-seasons, so they can, in the fall, they'll place orders for delivery in the spring. So that allows us to make those boats in the fall. So right now we're making a lot of dealer boats. That's when we're also making our stock ready to ship boats. And some things we know, like for even some of the build to order boats where we know we're going to sell a lot, we don't have a lot of different options. So, for example, the forager, there's only two foragers. There's a green or a blue one. So we can make a bunch of green foragers right now, knowing we're going to sell them. So we kind of do that. And then we have our holiday sale. So that's our one sale of the year. And really that sale is, this is an interesting philosophy. There's a lot of companies that approach the world through like sale, 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 sale. And there's definitely, that goes back to sort of like getting the consumer the right thing. There's science on consumer buying behavior that people tend to be jumpy and will buy on a sale. And so we don't do any sales during the regular season. We do one sale a year. It's during the holidays. And that's to allow people to get a little bit of a discount, A, and B, it's cash flow for us. So we got a 6-month cash flow problem right in the middle of it. We have a sale, and that helps our cash flow, helps us kind of like spool up for the spring, and it keeps our people busy. So starting here in a couple of weeks, where staff will be busy for another 2 months of work.
And how long does that sale run for?
Uh, it's we've kind of sidled into having it run the Monday before Thanksgiving through the end of the year. So it's a
Oh,
long
okay.
sale.
That's a long time. Okay.
Yeah, and in the middle of it, it doesn't, it's not like it's crazy busy all that time. It's busy for the first week, busy for the last week, moderate in the middle. But, that goes back to like, we used to do we do a 1-day sale, but that's almost it's more stressful on the customers because we suddenly have people who are like, buy, 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 and they're making poor buying decisions. And then they're calling us being like, I ordered the wrong color. I ordered the wrong size. And then our customer service people are like, oh my gosh, we got 300 orders today. That was
Too many.
crazy. We don't want to do that. And then our production people don't want this big day where it's like, okay, we have a 4-week lead time, but now we condensed our sale into 1 or 2 days. And now the lead time's 8 weeks. If we put the sale over 6 weeks, it allows people to really figure it out. There's of course always the people who are trying to buy their boat on, at 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and they're still going to make the mistake, but it drops back a lot.
Sure. Kind of touching on that, like I've noticed your product line, you mentioned too, like you've kind of narrowed your SKU count down. And
Yeah.
it seems like over the last few years, you've really been refining the product line and kind of, I don't know if it's creating categories, but it's like getting clarity, because I will say I have spent a fair bit of time clicking around over the years, and I'm like, I don't know which one I want. It makes it hard to choose, but it seems like you're changing. Like what's gone into those kind of new products and how you're categorizing things? I'm curious about like now, but I'm also curious about where you're headed, because it seems like there's a bigger master plan behind where you're going with this.
There's a little bit of a bigger master plan, but you're right. Well, it's funny, when I came to the business in 2016, mom, Sherry, as the designer, she's just like, somebody calls with an idea, she makes the idea, we start selling the idea. So we had all these weird overlapping products that were confusing, and some of them we were only selling like 2 to 3 a year. And I was like, this is a mess. So a lot of what we did was try to fix that. But even, 2018, 19, there's a ton of overlap in the product line. What's the real difference between a classic, an expedition, a narwhal? It was hard for people to sort those things out. And so a lot of customer service time was spent helping people sort that out. And I think there was some analysis paralysis, decision making happening that was leading to people not either buying the wrong boat or not buying a boat at all. And
Yep.
so you're absolutely right that we've tried to have much more segregation in the product line where most of the boats in the product line have a very clearly defined lane that they're sitting in. And we're really happy with where the product line is now, where it's like, okay, you've got the Caribou, which is not sized, and that's your basic kick around boat, but it's also a specialty boat for the bike pack people or people who want to carry gear on the front. And then we have the Expedition as the sort of performance, do everything, Alaska, Northern Canada boat. It's always going to have a deck on it. So it's warmer, it's more built for that. And then we have the Narwhal as kind of the alternative to that, that's self-bailing. And it gives you, it's a little more beginner friendly. And it's funny because when we came out with the Narwhal in 2017, it was the most advanced, technically uh, amazing pack raft ever made. And now it's our entry level whitewater boats. Just shows how you know. And then you step up to the Mage, more performance, more whitewater, but still a pack raft. And then you step up to the Valkyrie, very specialized, whitewater specific, kayaker level boat. And so we just kind of like tried to build that line where it's pretty easy to find exactly the boat that fits you. And then we're actually coming out with a flatwater line next year that's been teased, and we approached it the exact same way, where we're going to have a basically a Caribou level boat that's open and simple, and it's perfect for your recreational weekender paddler who might be just going out to do a paddle on the lake or the local flatwater river, and then or just is going to throw it in a duffel bag to take to the tropics for their vacation. And then we have a step up from that, kind of the Expedition version, which is about cargo fly, 3-point thigh straps, and a deck. So that's going to be your sort of Canadian Shield, boundary waters, northeastern United States, where you're going to be doing multi-day backcountry trips on flat water and lakes. And then you have your Valkyrie version. That's going to be called the Aleutian, and that's basically a inflatable sea kayak.
Wow.
So
And like, what is the length? I'm super curious of an inflatable sea kayak. What's the length on it?
I want to say it's between 14 and 15 feet. So it's
Oh,
not
wow.
quite as long as a proper sea kayak, but it's pretty fast. It's noticeably fast. It has a skeg. It's got 4-point thigh straps. Got inflatable floor.
Ooh,
You a really experienced paddler can absolutely handle open water in it. And I say that hesitantly because I think open water is the most dangerous thing in the world.
hands down.
Yeah, more dangerous than whitewater. But experienced people paddle in it all the time, and with the proper safety equipment and the experience and team, yeah, that boat will absolutely go out there and handle all of that stuff. But it's a fantastic in inshore sea kayak thing, and really where that boat will be targeted. Kind of how the Valkyrie isn't really a back. People do backpack with it to get into wild and crazy class 4 or 5 runs. The It's not meant to replace a hard shell sea kayak, just like the Valkyrie isn't meant to replace a hard shell kayak. But you can't check a hard shell kayak on a plane unless you're really dedicated to where you're going. Whereas you can check a Valkyrie and go anywhere in paddle class 4 if you're an experienced kayaker having a great time. Same thing, if you live, say, in Seattle, well, I don't think this is going to replace, if you already own a hard shell sea kayak, this boat's not going to replace that for your daily. You're going to go down to Ballard and paddle around or go out in Puget Sound. But if you really love sea kayaking, you might be taking a trip to Ketchikan or Juneau or Greenland or Norway or wherever you want to go. You can't check a 17-foot, $5,000 carbon sea kayak onto an airplane. It's just theoretically possible, but the reality is that. So now you're stuck renting, which means you can only go sea kayaking where there might actually be a rental place. Versus this, you put it in and you can go anywhere you want. And then even once you arrive there, you can then go on the smaller plane. Like you can put it on a float plane out of Ketchikan and get further away. So that's the idea with that, is it's a travel sea kayak.
I'm curious about because Alpacka is very close to your customer. That's one of the advantages you guys have had of just
Yeah.
you're tight with the customer. Like there's feedback, they're giving it to you. You're listening, you can hear it. But it also sounds like that proximity to your customer in the past had led to a whole like cornucopia of different product styles because you were listening so well.
Yep.
How do you balance that now in the sense of like taking feedback, product testing, but also be like, hey, you know what? I think this is what the customer needs, as opposed to always listening to what they're telling you they need.
Those are dynamic internal conversations.
Okay.
So, and because that's coming from multiple ends. I like to think one of my biggest skills in running the business is my ability to see what I think the customer wants, the broadest spectrum of customers want. Because people will write with ideas like crazy, and some are good, some are bad, some are, but the biggest challenge is a lot of them are very unique or specialized. And I tend to look at things through the widest possible lens or funnel. That doesn't, we do make specialty boats like the Valkyrie and the Sea Kayak, but um, there's a lot of other things where, like our design engineer, Dustin, great, fantastic. And then Jeff Kramer, who works closely with him, but they're both whitewater guys. That's what they do and want to do. So they view everything through a whitewater lens. So even when we're teasing around with the Forager, for example, they view it solely through, can we take this down the Grand Canyon, which is a great use for it. But I view it through the people that are buying these. The reason that we're selling hundreds of these a year and not single digit numbers a year is not because it's good for the Grand Canyon, because it's good for these Alaska trips, these fly-in trips and stuff like that. So I do try to take a much broader lens of where things are at. And so a lot of the focus there is what is going to be the most useful for the widest group of people.
How do you gauge that, right? Because I mean, is it a spidey sense? Is it conversations? Is it data? Like, how are you gauging what you think is the best use for the customers?
Experience in a lot of different areas. And so the interesting thing with flat water is that's probably my weakest skill. If you actually look through the product line, my influence is in a lot of places because I've been fishing since I was a little kid and I'm passionate about that. I've been hunting since I was a little kid and I'm passionate about that. I've been paddling since I was young and I'm passionate about that. And then I picked up whitewater 10 years ago and got pretty good at that. So I feel like I have my thumb on the pulse of all of these different sports and how different people in different areas would use them and kind of think through that. And then I also, and then I rode bikes for years and I just have a lot of that sort of experience in different realms rather than experience in a single realm. But then thinking about flat water, like I am bad when it comes to I don't like sea kayaking. I'll just admit it here. There's nothing wrong with it. I just have it's never spoken to me.
You're in good company.
Yeah. 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 But I know some people love it. So one of the challenges with coming out with these flat water boats was like making sure that they're going to be acceptable to the people that are going to use them. I think they're going to, and I think they're there, but I've relied more on input from testers and other people who are close with the company who love those sports, who are like, this boat is perfect.
Gotcha. You talked about slow growth and not growing for growth's sake. I'd imagine that you've been approached by people over the last 10 years who knocked on the door and said, hey, we'd love to invest. We'd love to be a part of this. You guys have kept it a family business. What's your thinking around maintaining ownership as a family? How you're going to manage that for growth's sake? What do you see the future? Like, where does it go in the future? I mean, I'm not saying whatever you say you're committed to, but I'm just curious, like, it's been a family business. Do you want this thing to stay a family business? Where do you want it to go in the future?
Those are good questions. I think everybody's dream is, oh, they're going to have kids. Then maybe the kids want to take over the family business. That's not realistic with a disabled child. But that's not to say the business can't survive in other ways and be supportive to our son as he gets older. But he's not probably going to be able to run the business. We'll see. But oh, going back to my bankruptcy years and watching kind of what happens, there's a lot of businesses in the out. I think a lot of businesses in the outdoors succeed because there's people at the top that care more about the product than anything. I think the businesses, it's not to say there aren't outdoor companies that have done well just because there's been MBAs at the top and figured out how to make money by making catchy things. There are those businesses, but more of them fail. More of those businesses fail than the businesses that are run by sort of the passion people at the top. So I think that's a critical element. Uh, and even if you look through a lot of the larger outdoor businesses, obviously Patagonia being, standard bearer, but the Chenards have always been at the top of that, and they've always had, very strong passion projects as part of Patagonia's business, and I think that served that company well. But North Face has been a major conglomerate company for decades now. But you forget that it was founded by Doug Thompson, who was passionate about it and built it into what it is. And Dana Designs Packs, and then later Mystery Ranch, which is now sold. And you know, you just kind of wander through all of those. I still remember the days when OR was owned by, I think it was Ron, who founded it. I can't remember his last name, but lots of those companies, even Cascade Designs, the guys that developed the original Thermarest, they were engineers and backpackers, not MBAs.
Yeah.
So I think
Arc'teryx is the same way.
Arc'teryx is the same way. Yeah, the original owners of Arc'teryx were, I mean, they were fantastic people, and the people that designed for them really cared a lot. Once you reach a certain size, sometimes you just need private equity level money, and we're a long way from that. But I think that's kind of the core business philosophy that I have, that you've got to kind of stay part of the business in order to keep it going, especially for small to medium sized business. So I'm reluctant to just pursue growth for growth's sake there. And then if there was a time to do that, it was 2020 to 2022, when there was spectacular growth and funny money being thrown around. We probably could have sold the business for more than I would need for the rest of my life at that point in time. But I don't know how it would have survived post that, because the businesses that did sell, they are not healthy right now. And we're seeing a lot of slipping and pulling back, because if you overextended yourself during those years, we're even seeing it not just from the businesses that got bought up by private equity and then are just getting kind of trashed now, but we're seeing it from businesses that were longtime family held businesses that I think may have made some growth and investment mistakes. I'm going to speak out of turn here because I don't know the story well, but I know that Werner Paddles, who's been around for 50 years, was the dominant player in the paddle industry, makes the best paddles in the market. They spent, I don't know how much money, but they spent a lot of money on a brand new state-of-the-art factory in 2018. And I feel bad for them because they're probably pretty conservative about, can we actually afford this? Can we do everything on this? And then COVID hits, and they just happened to be in a state that had a lot of shutdown rules, and they had a lot of trouble keeping that factory going through the pandemic. And they didn't get to, because they couldn't have as many workers and all this other stuff, they couldn't really catch up with orders during the wave. And then when things settle out the back end, I think they were kind of in trouble, and they ended up selling to Jackson Kayak and moving. So they had a brand new factory in Salton, Washington, that they ended up essentially mothballing, moving everything. So I even remember people here at Alpacka that were like, what are we going to do? Are we going to build a new factory? And I kind of put the brakes on all that. And I said, I don't think this is going to last. And it didn't. And we made it through it. And now we're in a really financially healthy position. And I think the companies that were smart like that held back, they may not have made as much money during those three years, but they're in a better financial position now. And they aren't running out of runway, which I think we've seen a lot of, especially in the bike industry. but in other industries as well. And
Yeah, and when you take those checks, you end up bringing a bunch of different visions into your business, right? And if you've
yeah,
been founder led for a long time, and all of a
yep.
sudden now people have new perspectives and new ideas, and they've got skin in the game, it's hard to make those decisions.
Yeah, and there was an article in I can't remember where it was in, but about the loss of paddle sports makers in the Northwest over the last 10 years, because a bunch of them, including Werner, have kind of sold or closed or shut down, and we're seeing it in Next Adventure, which is one of the main paddle sports. They're gone. They're actually going to come back, but the paddle sports shop isn't going to come back, so
Hmm.
that's gone. And then Rutabaga in Wisconsin was set to close, and apparently they're in talks to not close, but and then CKS Online disappeared, and then I can't remember. There was one in Austin. So we keep seeing these large players that are built on private equity investment and growth-based models kind of tank because things have not been as good the last few years.
Yeah, which comes in if you want to grow and scale, you need more space, right?
Yep.
That's one of those things for you. And I know that you don't want to grow for growth's sake, but you're bringing out a whole new line of boats. Like I know you don't want to just twiddle your thumbs and just ride a wave. I understand that
Yep.
you are a person who wants to go places and take things purposefully with a
Yeah.
vision clearly. How do you grow? Because you're in the sense of like, yeah, the sales, I'm not worried about the sales. I'm more in like, how do you internally grow? Because like eventually you'll just run out of space.
Yeah, and we're kind of at that point to some degree. We get more efficient.
Okay.
I figure out new ways to run the product line where we're more efficient running things through. And then you kind of have a choice on space. You can piecemeal grow, which we've been doing a little bit of, where, for example, we have a main factory next door that houses most everything but sewing and design. And we have sewing over across the street in a little place. Well, a big part of that main factory is our RF welding department, which puts all the different pieces that are welded onto the boat, but it also makes all the inflatable pads and seats and things like that. They need space. Well, the reality is I don't need the next potential growth step is I could say, hey, we could, rather than spending millions on a new 40,000 square foot factory, of which there's not a building in here, maybe we can find a used industrial building down the road where we have maybe 4,000 or 5,000 square foot space. That's not super expensive and could easily turned over to another business down the line. And we'll put all of our pads and floors and seats in there so that we can move our big welders into there. So they suddenly feel like, oh, we have space and we can grow here. Well, now that opens up a bunch of more space, a little bit more space in the factory. And we just, so we do kind of that things. But at some point you do get to the point where you're like, okay, now we have to make the big leap. And we're still several years from needing to make that leap of like, hey, we really need 40 or 50,000 square feet of space.
Yeah.
And I think
Go ahead.
the other thing there is that you have to know when that becomes viable, and you have to be willing to take the leap. So that's where we kind of sit right now. We have a nice space right now that we're happy with. We're in about 20,000 square feet of space across 4 buildings. And rather than saying, oh, you know what we should do is let's just build a new building and go with 25 or 27,000 square feet of space. So like incremental growth there. The challenge with that incremental growth is it will accommodate a bit more capacity, but not a lot. But from what I've observed, we went up to like, say, 40,000 square feet of space. 40,000 square feet of space could potentially accommodate us with exponential growth. So I just have to figure out when that timing is right to go up to that size. Like, can we afford to go up to that size? Can we pay for it with our current level of sales? And as soon as we can, then that's a good idea, because now that space can really accommodate exponential growth. Versus if we went up to like 28 or 30,000 square feet, we might be able to pay for that right now, but we might outgrow that in 5 years and be stuck. And now we're like, oh, we own a 30,000 square foot building that nobody, there's no business in 3 counties that needs that building. So now it's just kind of a waste. So there's all this kind of those calculations that I kind of keep in the back of my mind.
It reminds me of this idea that constraints breeds creativity. And I like that
Yes.
that's how you're working right now is like, lots of constraints, literally physical constraints, and you're just being creative to get through it. So I like that idea.
Yeah. The hardest thing with the flat water boats is they're long.
Yeah, they're bigger.
So they're hard to fit in certain rooms. If they don't, there's almost zero impact in production for 9 out of the 10 steps of making them. But when we put the floors on, those are glued, and the boats are inflated when the floors are installed. Well, we have 12-foot ceilings,
Hmm.
so 12-foot boats and 15-foot boats don't fit in a 12-foot ceiling room that well. So rather than that room being, housing 10 caribous and mages and narwhals, it can house 4 of the sea kayaks, of the Aleutians. And so that really, and so I have to factor that in when we're coming out with a new product line. So, for example, the Aleutian, the sea kayak, we're building all of the ones for 2026. We're building them right now in our slow season. So we're not going to build any in March. So when they're sold out, and you have to wait till 2027. And
Okay.
that's just kind of how we deal with those kinds of things. It's sort of like, when do we have manufacturing space available? How many can we put in there? And then that we just have to be satisfied with that being it.
I like that. It
Yeah.
also makes it a bit more desirable if you can't always get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it'll work fine.
That's great. Alpacka didn't invent the pack raft, but you certainly have grown the the business, the sport.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, I've heard, and I think actually I've heard you compare it to like what fat skis did for skiing, or really good suspension has done for mountain biking. Is like you've kind of opened up this whole new world where it's like, oh, actually, I could
Yep.
consider doing that now because you've made it a little bit easier for me to hop in a boat and go down class 3, class 4 water. How do you see your role and responsibility in being the market leader, and how do you see it as far as your perspective on the competitors who are, you now have a
Yep.
target on your back where years before you didn't necessarily have a target on your back?
Yeah. There's so one of the big questions is how much do you stay blinders on, focused internally? Like we're just going to do what we do and try to come up with the best ideas we can. And how much do you look externally of like, what are those other guys doing? Because I would say we know and have always known that we do not have a monopoly on good ideas.
Sure.
And any company that thinks that they do is foolish. But we do care a lot, and we're focused on, constantly kind of innovating and coming out with better things, which some companies don't do. A lot of companies don't do, and even some companies that are sort of like, you know, pioneers like we are, where we didn't, like you say, we didn't invent pack rafting, we didn't invent the pack raft, but we developed the modern um, incarnation of the sport and all the products that are in it. Um, I've gone through and looked at all the so-called innovations in pack rafting, and we're like upwards of 95% of them are coming out of our shop, which I'm super proud of. And that's where I want to be. I do think, I want to see more competition that does come up with new ideas. And we're maybe seeing a little bit of it. I think especially we are not the first ones to come up with flat water pack rafts. There's other companies that were ahead of us in terms of coming out with those. Ours are going to be a little different, and I think that's important. I think it's really nice to do. One of the things that I've always had to think about is sort of like, when do you adopt a standard developed by somebody else versus when do you invent your own wheel? And I think biking is really instructive there. because a lot of bike companies come out with ridiculous new standards that don't that drives the
Yeah.
consumer crazy,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
You're not
don't
making any
add
friends here.
yeah, that I don't think sometimes I think they're doing it just for a new standard's sake and not actually to improve the sport. I will step back and say sometimes you have to do those to get where you're like you get this aha moment. But how many different rear hub spacing standards are there in bikes? Like it's out of control, and you see keep seeing them going back and forth, and then when they patent those standards, it makes it everybody's trying to work around them, and you go um, looking like that. So I do think there's a time where the consumer benefits from having a widely accepted standard. The best example of that is I know Apple pitched a fit about this, but I'm so happy that Europe forced them to get rid of their terrible lightning cable and go with USB-C because, and there's this joke about this low-level politician in Europe who like showed up at Parliament with like a just a armful of different cords and things where all the electronics he had. He's like, this has to stop because consumers are being different crazy between micro USB, USB B, USB A, USB C, Lightning, all these different cables. And we really have moved to a world where most of us, I my USB C covers almost all of my electronics now, and I love it. So I'm sensitive to that. So, for example, our new boat coming out, it has a skeg. Well, we could have come up with our own unique skeg mounting design, but the only then suddenly our skeg only works with our boats. It doesn't work with any other brand's boats. I don't think that makes customers happy. I don't, and so yeah, we looked at what else was out in the market and we said, well, let's use this one so that way the skegs will be interchangeable. And so the mounting plate isn't particularly unique or different. It is the mounting plate. And that way different skegs can work. But then we can come up with our own skeg based on what we want. So we're not going to just copy everything all the way down to it. Maybe we like a little lower profile one or whatever we do in there. So I kind of think through those things as we go on there. Um, I don't really have a challenge with, like the grab loop. Like it's funny when you think about innovation, it's like, oh, everybody just accepts that. Well, Sherry had to come up with a grab loop to put on a boat because before we came out with pack rafts, there was, I mean, there was nothing there. The several trail boats we used from the 90s, they didn't have grab loops. They had these little D-rings that when they ripped out because they were so delicate, they actually ripped a hole in the boat. So she had to come up with like how the grab loop works, and it's been really effective. It's a super simple thing. We've been doing the same ones for 20 years. I don't have any stress over other companies putting almost the exact same grab loop on their boat. To me, it's a universal thing that other companies should adopt because then the accessories all work together. So that our bow bag, which works with our grab loops, will work with another brand's boat and go on their grab loops versus if the other brand is using strange custom D-rings or they decide to go with inch grab loops instead of 3/4 inch grab loops. Well, now our clips don't work on their bags and their bags are oversized for ours. I think that companies are good when they look through and say, what is a universal standard that we should all be kind of using so that the end consumer has a fairly flexible product that works together. So that my mountain bike wheel will fit in this other brand's bike. Makes sense to me. Versus when you're tweaking with the frame geometry, like when we're tweaking with the overall raft shape, that can be unique to your brand. And that's where, like, I would rather see the other companies be more innovative of their own versus this kind of like small standards that are good for the regular customer.
Just to wind it down a little bit, is there
Yeah.
a packrafting trip that's been on your list for the longest that you haven't been able to take off yet? That's still like the unicorn that you're going to hit one day?
Oh my gosh. I have so
Maybe,
many.
okay, cool. Give me your
So
top two.
so many.
And if you want to keep them secret, we won't steal them. So just give me the ones that you're willing to talk about publicly.
Yeah. Um, well, let me use this example off the top of my head. This goes back to the whole thing we were talking about of sort of like, is this a good thing? How do I ethically feel about this? Packrafting, from what I have heard, because I haven't been down there, Jacob Moon pioneered La Venta in Mexico, or the incredible backcountry river that you can really only do with a pack raft. And the photos out of there are amazing. And there are now many people going down there to do that trip. There are guide services operating out of there. There's the whole thing out of there. Now I've seen the pictures and they look absolutely stunning. And there's part of me that's like wishes I had been on the front end of that, of like getting to experience that the first time, because I know that feeling when you have never seen anything published about it, and then you just go and you're like, the sort of wonder of what is this amazing place. I still would love to go do that trip because I know for me seeing it the first time, it's going to be just as magical, but there's more sort of expectation of that. But I have a lot of trips in all over Alaska that they're really just lines on the map, like where I've drawn new different routes to see the the place that's honestly in my most highest curiosity, because I haven't done it, is sort of the stuff that's in on the BC side of Southeast Alaska. So you've basically, as you get north of Whistler, Pemberton, you've got rivers after rivers after rivers that are coming into the BC coast, and then you hit Alaska and you go inland. So the Taku drainage, and not the Stikine itself, but there's all these other drainages up there. That's just incredible terrain, and still very few people are up there, and I'd love to go experience that sometime.
There you go. The final questions I always end with is, how do you want to grow as a founder in the next few years? Or I shouldn't say founder. How do you want to grow as a leader of the business?
Personally or the business?
How do you want to grow personally?
Oh man, that's a personally, it's been the last 5 years have been a roller coaster
Okay.
between COVID, doubling growth, um, becoming a parent, becoming a parent of a disabled child, like navigating all of that. Like, I would love to grow to the point where I feel like we got it all back under control and things are, kind of smooth sailing, which I think we're getting there, but it's been um, effort there. But I would like to I would love to get to the point where I feel like I have more time available for my staff, where I have more time available for my family, where I have more time available for my wife, because feel like all of us have felt like we've been spread really thin for a long time. And so we're kind of coming back around to that. I'll kind of leave it with, I, we talked about the fact that we're manufactured domestically, which I'm really proud of. We just did a presentation for the Outdoor Writers Association, or I can't remember. I think that's what it was, about domestic manufacturing, which we did with a couple of other businesses. That was really cool. And I've kind of gone back and forth on my philosophies and stuff like that over the years. I was a really strong evangelist for um, in-house manufacturing, USA manufacturing for a long time, and then I kind of uh, came off my high horse a little bit when I kind of recognized that there's different pressures and different things that lead people to make different decisions in business. And so trying not to be super critical, but I've um, kind of come back around, even though I know it's a political hot topic, and it's a difficult one because people are so amped about politics these days, which is understandable. It's a stressful time, especially in America. But where I've come around and I worry about. I've been reading this Ezra Klein book called Abundance, which it's really recommend to people. It's super interesting, but he talks a lot about manufacturing in there. And one of my philosophies there is what I worry about is that when you don't manufacture, it's not really the money side of things. It's the lack of knowledge. And I stress about that at times. I'm like, I want to know, even if we choose not to, I want to know how everything is made. I think it's so important to know how to make things because it just provides you incredible stuff. And he uses an example in there that, 30 years ago, I think it's Taiwan Semiconductor, the chip company, they got their start by making chips that Intel didn't want to make because they were of low level or low interest. But by learning how to make those low level chips and learning how to make them efficiently, that's what allowed them to develop the technology and the skill and the knowledge base to make the world's most advanced chips that they're making now. And so I think about those things a lot, where if we're not making all the parts of our boats, then I start to lose kind of how those things are made. I lose those efficiencies. So that's why I care about manufacturing and manufacturing in-house.
Makes sense. How do you define success for yourself?
To me, it's the most satisfying feedback I can ever get is when people talk about the brand in a positive way. So it's not necessarily about me or anything like that, but man, when the customers love the brand, that means we're doing it right, because that flows through to everybody there. And it's funny, my mom's got a story about that. She just turned 80. Wow. And on her 80th birthday, she went down to Tractor Supply Company. This is not a location where you're expecting to find pack rafters, right? And she's checking out, she's probably buying like bird seed or something. She's checking out at the front desk, and there's a kid there working there, fresh out of college. And, he's like, hey, do you want to sign up for the mailing list? And I don't think I'm interested. Oh, but you get 10% off today. Yada, yada, yada. Fine, I'll sign up for the mailing list. So she gives him her email address, which is her Alpacka email address. And as she's spelling it out, he's like, eyes light up. He's like, Packrafting, Alpacka Rafts? He's like, oh my gosh, my senior thesis at college was this 10-day trip with pack rafts because the college had pack rafts. And, he just launched into this diatribe for her about how much they'd like impacted his life. And this is a kid working at Tractor Supply Company. Really cool. And then at the end, he's like, well, what do you do for Alpacka? So that to me that's success.
That's cool. That's a really great way to end it. Based on my experience, you're living a successful life. So yeah, congrats. Thanks so much for this, Thor. It was really good to hear more of your story and learn more about your deer own. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed that because I feel like we covered a lot of things that it wasn't just the repetitive brand story, rinse, repeat from previous ones.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end of this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend you think may enjoy it too. You can also take a few seconds to subscribe to the podcast. Anything you do to help share the love here, we'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.